This is Tom Kane, the voice of Yoda in Star Wars The Clone Wars, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
You must learn the ways of the Force if you're to come with me to Alderaan.
Alderaan? I'm not going to Alderaan. I've got to get home. It's late. I'm in port as it is.
I need your help, Luke. She needs your help. I'm getting too old for this sort of thing.
Luke Skywalker and Han Solo rescued the princess, destroyed the Death Star, but their story didn't end there.
Comes from a breed of Boken Jedi trained in the wild after the temple fell.
Like me?
No. He was trained as a Jedi. You, I trained to be something more.
Harrison, he's not interchangeable. Other actors cannot fill those shoes.
I never expected to be a leading man. I was the first one in our family to go to college, and I was not a good student. And I didn't fit in. And then I found drama. The people that I was telling stories with were the people I was missing.
Dresden. Oh, is this Harry Dresden, the wizard? Her tone was apologetic, as though she were terribly afraid she would be insulting me. No, I thought, it's Harry Dresden, the lizard. Harry Dresden, the wizard, is one door down. It is the prerogative of wizards to be grumpy. It is not, however, the prerogative of freelance consultants who are late on their rent, so instead of saying something smart, I told the woman on the phone, "Yes, ma'am, how can I help you today?"
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Coffee with Kenobi. This is your bi-weekly, spoiler-free place for Star Wars community and conversation. I'm your host, Dan Zare, delighted to talk Star Wars with each and every one of you. Since May of 2013, whether you are a fan of Star Wars films, Disney Plus live action and animation, books, comics, collectibles, or Star Wars experiences at the Disney theme parks, on Coffee with Kenobi, you are among friends as we virtually share a cup of coffee while talking about this galaxy far, far away. Thank you to the official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi, MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. Check out coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel for a no-cost, no-obligation quote, and let them know Coffee with Kenobi and Dan Zare sent you. On today's special show, New York Times best-selling author, actually multiple New York Times best-selling author, Jim Butcher is here to talk about his brand new book, The Olympian Affair, coming out on November 7th. And of course, we'll talk about his famous Dresden Files series and, naturally, that galaxy far, far away. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite coffee mug, and let's have some coffee with Kenobi. Joining us today for a cup of coffee, he is the multiple New York Times bestselling author of the Dresden Files, the Codex Alera, and, of course, the newish series, steampunk series, the Cinder Spires, of which we're going to talk a lot about. The brand new book, The Olympian Affair, comes out on November 7th. Please welcome Jim Butcher.
Hi.
How's it going, man? It's great. It is great to have you on the program, for sure.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so this is great because the co-creator of Coffee with Kenobi, he did the show with me for a few years. His name is Corey Clubb, and he introduced me. He said, Dan, there's this series about this wizard, and he lives in Chicago. And of course, I'm a big Chicago Cubs fan. And he said, by the way, there's one book where the main character fights in Wrigley Field. I'm like, well, I got to check this out. Well, I devoured all of them. So it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah. So let's just, I mean, the trick with interviewing someone like you is that you've probably been asked every question every way possible. But I'm excited about this because not only am I a fan of your work, but I also teach writing at the college and high school level. So this will be great. I'm really interested in your craft of writing. I love your prose. I love your character development. Where did it kind of all start for you, this love of the written word?
It all started my senior year in high school. This will let you know what kind of person I was. My senior year in high school, I was doing the cool senior thing, and I was skipping class. But I was skipping class to go hang out in the library. because that's where the books were. And so I was in there, and the vice principal in charge of student discipline came into the library, and of all, they never showed up there because the troublemaker kids never went there, which is one of the reasons I hung out there. But he comes walking in, and he says, "Oh, Jim, you must be here for the author talk." And I was like, "Absolutely, yes, I am here for the author talk." And he says, "Okay, well, help me set up chairs." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, okay, I can do that." And so I wound up sitting in on this author talk. I had no idea what was going to happen. And Margaret Weiss, who wrote the Dragonlance Chronicles, was the person who was coming in to talk to the class, and she started talking about being an author. And I thought to myself, "Oh my God, here's this person. She's from my hometown, and she's written these best-selling books, and she did it. What if I could do that too?" And so I went off, and the next summer, after my first year of college, I sat down and I wrote my first novel, and it was awful. And I didn't know that at the time. I thought it was great. And so I kept at it. I started trying to find an agent and so on, and it didn't go very well because my novel was terrible. But I wrote the next novel, which was terrible, and the third one was awful, and the fourth one was awful, and the fifth and sixth and seventh novels, they were all terrible, and I kept writing. And by this time, I had become part of the professional writing program at the University of Oklahoma. Their School of Journalism had a whole track that was just professional writers. It was taught by a working professional writer, Debbie Chester. And so I was learning from her. I was trying to get things done. And one semester, she looks at me and she says, "Jim, you keep writing these novels in our course," because I was taking a course called Writing a Genre Fiction Novel, or what you did was write a genre fiction novel over the course of a semester. And she says, "You keep talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Babylon 5, and we're talking about writing craft. Maybe you should write some urban fantasy or some science fiction and try your hand at it and see how it goes." And I was very much a swords and horses fantasy writer. That's exactly what I was going to write. And I turned to her and I thought, "Dear woman, you clearly don't understand what's going on. I have a bachelor's degree in English literature, with an emphasis in creative writing, whereas you have merely published 40 novels. But that semester I decided I was going to prove her wrong. And the way I decided to prove her wrong was I was going to do absolutely everything she told me to do. I was going to fill out all the little forms and do the character profiles and the outlines and outline the chapters as I wrote them. And she was going to see what terrible cookie cutter pablum crap emerged from that kind of process. And I wrote the first book of the Dresden Files, which showed her. And that was how I got started. And it was, the whole Dresden Files thing, I was just doing that to prove my teacher wrong. I mean, it was just a one semester project, and now it's gotten completely out of hand.
Well, thank goodness she challenged you like that, because, I mean, look at that. And I love that you mentioned Buffy. Of course, I'm a big fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I think that TV series was just absolutely genius with the character development. And so that inspired the Dresden Files.
Character development. I mean, the brilliant thing about Buffy was everybody who was a writer on Buffy in that writing room went on to become a successful writer in Hollywood. I mean, it was everybody there. They started off and they learned and they developed their craft and they really got behind what they were doing. And all the folks there know how to write a good story.
You're right about that. Absolutely. Are there certain authors that spoke to you growing up? I mean, when someone asks me that, I say Mark Twain, and I can already tell by the wit you've got a little bit of that Twain in you, which is the highest compliment I could give someone, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Thank you very much. Fellow Missourian, Mark Twain.
Ah, yes, absolutely.
Let's see. I did read Twain. I read a lot of Kipling. C.S. Lewis was a big influence. Let me think. David Eddings, his Belgariad series, which was just great, pulp fantasy and a whole lot of fun. Oh my gosh. I read just everybody that came out. Tolkien, of course, was up there. I mean, he was one of the first, I remember getting strep throat, in first grade, and my sisters went out and bought me the primary color box set of Tolkien books, the green, red, yellow, blue ones. And then they also bought me the Han Solo trilogy by Brian Daley, who was the first one to write Star Wars books after Star Wars came out. And I mean, these were all the authors, Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, of course, because, they were early writers who were there. The Shannara books were huge, and then eventually I started reading other people as well. Stephen King, Dean Koontz was a huge influence. Particularly, I prefer Koontz to King because I think Dean Koontz has is stronger on the craft, and King is more of an artist. Which that's fair, and it's perfectly fine. It just depends on what you like more. Probably my hero as a more developed writer, at least as an older writer, is Robert B. Parker, who wrote the Spencer novels. Robert B. Parker is kind of he's kind of a personal hero. I mean, he started writing those Spencer novels, just banged them out, got them done. Lots of people loved him. He died working on the next one at the keyboard like a man.
Wow.
That's how I want to go out, is working on my next book. And which makes me a little bit leery of writing sometimes. And if I had to pick someone who was, Sanderson and Rothfuss, of course, are both brilliant. But if I had to pick someone who I thought was just the very best writer working right now, I would say it was Lois McMaster Bujold. She wrote the Miles Vorkosigan books, the Vorkosigan saga, and she is the writer who I think best blends character and world and plot into this seamless whole. So that, you can really, she's one of those writers that if you invest emotionally in the writing, there's a rich payoff for it. And I really love that. You could really cry when she wants you to cry. That's good stuff. I love it.
It is great. Well, hearing you talk about this and going back to trying to prove your professor wrong and sort of the beautiful irony of that, I would guess writing a novel is a lot like planning a Disney World vacation. You've got a plan, you've got an outline, you've got to be kind of malleable and flexible because things are going to come up and that just kind of grows the experience.
I like to think of it as a road trip, as a spontaneous road trip. You know where you're going to start, you know where you're going to end up. That's what you need before you get started on the trip. And then you kind of might have an idea of some places you want to hit in the middle on the way there. But I know if I'm going to drive to California from Kansas City, I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to get there, but I know I'm going to start on I-70 and start heading west. And that'll be the general thing that I need to do. And then I'll need to make some choices about whether I want to go north or south or windy, through the middle of Colorado. And, but you don't have to know every step of the way. You don't have to know every curve of the road, every exit you need to take. You only need to see about as far ahead as your headlights can go to just stay on the road. And that's what I like to think that storycraft is. It's that ability to let you know, okay, I'm not quite sure exactly where I'm going to be, but I do know that the next 50 feet, these things need to happen. And that's what learning storycraft is really, really good for. And you just go 50 feet, 50 feet, 50 feet, and eventually you get to the end.
Amazing. So when it's time for you, I mean, I'm assuming when you've got a big craft, I mean, you obviously dedicate a certain amount of time each day. When there are lulls, do you find yourself to be restless?
I'm much more at peace when I'm writing. When I'm getting writing done, that's usually when I'm relaxed. And when I'm not getting writing done, then I'm wandering around, bumping into walls, doing different things. And I like to try a lot of new and different things, just sort of different experiences. So lately, in Colorado, it's been the Colorado experience. So it's like hiking and whitewater rafting and stuff like that. And this is all stuff that I'll be able to use in writing at some point or another. So I think that's one of the best things you can do as a writer is go out and find new experiences and try new things.
And just kind of fill up your own cup. Yeah.
Yeah, you do. It does. I mean, it's not only good for you as a human being, it's good for you as a writer because it gives you more of a basis in which to kind of more soil in which to plant things, for your writing. So now I know what it feels like to fall into a 37-degree river with no wetsuit on and to know, oh wait, I've got about 90 seconds before I go into hypothermia. I need to get out of here, like that. So.
Well, okay. So, your three different, I mean, you mentioned that I know initially, and I read, of course, interviews and things like that. I know initially, you wanted to get into the world of swords and horses, as you put it. And you mentioned Tolkien. I'm assuming you're a D&D fan as well. All that, it's same here. It's great stuff. Talk about the main differences. I mean, the Codex Alera, let's kind of start there and just kind of, for people who may not have taken in the first book yet, kind of help us to explain what that's about.
Well, the Codex Alera was a series I wrote on a bet because I was a loudmouth on the internet and I didn't want to lose an argument. So there was a discussion going on at the time, and it was one of those discussions where you hit reply and then caps lock and start typing, you know. But the whole discussion was one side was arguing that in order to write a really great novel, you had to have a great idea. And so they were arguing the holy idea, capital letters, and that if you had a good enough idea, it didn't matter how badly you wrote it, it would do well. And they held up Jurassic Park as an example. It was their example, not mine. And then the other side of the argument, which was the side that I was kind of de facto championing, was the argument that it didn't matter how many times a given story's been told. A good storyteller can sit down with it, can put his own spins on it, can make it his own, and can give it to an audience who will love it. How many versions of Romeo and Juliet have we seen? You know, like that. And so that argument went back and forth. And finally, this guy says, all right, let's see you put your money where your mouth is. Let me give you a terrible idea and see you write a good story out of it. And because I am who I am, I replied to him, no. I tell you what, why don't you give me 2 terrible ideas? I'll use them both. And so the guy said, all right, first terrible idea is Lost Roman Legion. I'm so sick of Lost Roman Legions. All the Lost Roman Legions should have been found by now. So that's the first idea you have to use. I said, all right, what's the second one? And he says, Pokemon. And I took that and I said, okay, so let's start putting this together. And I went and studied the Lost Roman Legions. And there's a couple, but they usually refer to the 9th Hibernian Legion, which is the one that marched north of the wall in Britain and was never seen again. And odds are good they got wiped out, or they found out that it was cooler up there than it was in the Empire, and they just sort of settled in. We're not really sure what happened. But I said to myself, all right, they marched off into a storm, and that was the last time they were ever seen. Let's say they marched off into a storm and got Bermuda Triangled to somewhere else. Where did they go? Land of the Pokemon. So I look at Pokemon. Pokemon is itself a fusion of 2 ideas. First is the idea of kami from the Shinto religion. Kami are spirits that live inside all natural things. So a tree has a kami in it, a mountain has a kami, a pebble has a kami, and you should give respect to the spirit of all these natural things. And then they took that and they combined that with professional wrestling and they made Pokemon. So I decided, okay, well, the Romans go off to the land of the Pokemon, the kami. I got to have a good name for him. What am I going to call him? And in the background, I was watching Big Trouble in Little China. And it got to the point where Egg Chen says, all motion in the universe is caused by tension between positive and negative furies. I went, ooh, furies. That's even Roman. I could definitely work with that. And so I named these Pokemon. I named them Furies, and I had them, each embody one of the 6 elements as is understood in the East. As opposed to the Western 4-element scale. And then I said, okay, so the Romans march there. They start interacting with these Pokemons. What are they going to do with it? Make an empire. That's what Romans do. And so I gave them about 2,000 years to cook and to establish this empire and to have this, this complex dynamic land. And I did a lot of research into the Roman legions about what they were made out of and kind of the demographics of a Roman legion, if you will, at that time. And then it said, okay, what kind of society is going to be built from that? So, well, part of it is going to be Roman metropolitan centers because there's going to be Romans that are involved in that legion. But those legions were also about half German mercenaries. So I said, okay, so the rest of them is going to be, they're going to be these cosmopolitan centers with all these German freeholds around them. And so then I established that as my story world. I figured out how the magic of that world worked was all through these Furies. And then I started off in a farm in the middle of nowhere with the boy who was going to turn out to be a prince, because that's how fantasy stories start. I didn't make that rule. Somebody else established that well before me. And then I started writing, and I'd gotten through the first 50 pages or so, and it was going really well. And I turned back to this guy on the internet, and I said, you know what? I don't want to post this story here on the internet because we're still not sure how that's going to interact with copyright, but I think I could sell this. And the guy said, oh, so you're admitting I'm right. And so he got to be right, and I got a 6-book contract.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Needing a custom app or a website but just can't find the time, the creative juices or the technology to understand how to do it? Well, I've got great news for you. Try Lumenfire. Lumenfire builds brilliant custom apps and websites that make businesses more effective, productive, and profitable. This includes automating business processes and integrating software systems so they talk to each other. They are experts in FileMaker, Laravel, WordPress, Apple, and other technologies. Check out their site at lumenfire.com. That's luminfire.com. That's lumenfire.com.
Honestly, I hope he's done really well. I hope he's come up with a great idea. You know, I hope he's done well as well, because, you know, my viewpoint on writing is writers, I don't compete with anybody. You know, there's no other writers that I compete with. The only thing other writers do is have a fan base that might well cross over with mine, and my fans might cross over with theirs, and we'll both do better. And that's kind of how I view, you know, that aspect of writing. But there's no competition. There's just all of us making cool stuff together, and if we do really well, then we'll all do better.
Absolutely. There's enough in the proverbial pie for everyone to enjoy, and the cross-pollination is a massive part. You hit upon something fascinating to me, both as a fan of Star Wars and as an English teacher. You talked about, and I would have agreed with you on this, this idea of anybody, you know, a good writer can make any story sing. What you're describing, and you even alluded to it playfully at the end, this is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey to a degree, isn't it? This notion of the hero, you know, with the mysterious background, who has very humble origins, who desperately longs to find something new, refuses a call to adventure, finally accepts it, gets a mentor, and then things start to happen. Allies, enemies, you know, there's an apotheosis, some kind of a crisis of faith. And I see a lot of that, especially in the Dresden Files too.
Oh, absolutely. Campbell was no dummy. Although I don't like, I think I get more out of him now that I've spent a career doing writing and telling stories and learning about that than I would have when I was getting started. I don't think he's terribly helpful for writers as beginners.
Fair.
But Campbell, I like to make this distinction about Campbell, is that Campbell was not himself creating stories. He was analyzing stories. He was talking about stories. He was bringing them into the academic world, but he wasn't himself a creator. So he's kind of that reviewer that goes to the magic show and is really savvy and understands a bunch of things about the show that's going on and can tell you all kinds of things about performers and so on, but he doesn't have the same viewpoint as the guy who's up on the stage. And that's sort of a critical distinction that has to be made. He's great for analysis, which is, you know, which was his strong suit. But when it comes to creation, I think he is more useful as sort of an adjunct to writers to go look, you know, for them to work on their own material and then go look at Campbell and say, oh yeah, let me take this from Campbell, let me take that from Campbell, but not let me go to Campbell and learn how to write.
Right.
I don't think he's as strong for that.
It's like a difference between a coach and a player, like Michael Jordan versus Phil Jackson.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, they're going to have different perspectives, and they're each going to have different things that they're going to be good at teaching you. But I've met a lot of people who are like Joseph Campbell. He's the one who can teach you how to do things. It's like no. You need to learn nuts and bolts from somebody else.
Yeah, different hat. Very different.
You
know, no one has ever. Yeah, no, exactly. No one's ever quite explained that way. So I really appreciate that. Is there a different mindset for you, whether you're writing any of your three major kind of worlds? I mean, is it still, I know writing is a sort of a thing, and it's very rhythmical and beautiful in its own way, and it can be very self-soothing as well. But is there a different mindset kind of you carry with you in and out of your life, depending on the character you're writing?
Yeah, there must be, because there's a different soundtrack for each of the books. You know,
yes.
I have music for each one, you know, to access different things. Writing Dresden, because I write from a first-person point of view, you know, with Dresden, you know, I, me, and I have to draw so much more because I have to have that warm viewpoint, and the only way I can do that is to draw from my own experience and, you know, my own emotion and my own pain. So when I'm writing Dresden, it can be much more personal. And those scenes that, that people will come tell me, "Oh, you tore my heart out with this scene," and I just kind of nod and I go, "Oh, you don't know what I had to go through to get to a place where I could write that." Not just the life experience, but the actual in the scene itself. I'm sobbing like a baby when I'm writing stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
and that gets real personal. With the third person viewpoints, with Alera and with the Cinder Spires. That's a very different experience because I have to pretend to be people who are very, very different from me. Dresden is, sort of, he's just kind of your basic nerd, and that's how I write him. He just happens to be a magic nerd instead of a science fiction nerd. But these other characters, when I write from the viewpoint of Azana, a middle-aged mother, or when I'm writing from the viewpoint of an outcast nobleman, in his name is Benedict, in the novella for the Cinder Spires. These are people who have had very different life experiences than me, and so it's much harder to kind of settle down in their viewpoint and figure out, okay, how do I relate to this person? How do I understand this person? How do I get across to the reader who they are and make them likable or at least enjoyably hateable? And still, and still move ahead with the story and make sure I get their motivation and I understand what they want. And that is often very challenging, but it also, I think, kind of creates a greater sense of empathy. I think it's been proven that the more you read books, the more developed your empathy is for other people. And I think writing books in many ways does much the same thing. Where, it's hard for me to judge anybody anymore. I just can't. So many people, because everybody goes through their own unique and special kind of hell and their own unique and special kind of heaven, in their life. And until you've walked a mile in their shoes, you don't know. And so, more and more people come to me. It's like, well, what do you think about this or that? Or who do you support for this or that? And I'll just be like, I don't know. Don't ask me. I'm just a guy who writes down the conversations of his imaginary friends for a living. I really don't think anybody should be really seeking my thoughts on anything real. I'm not a real world guy. I'm an imaginary world guy. You want to come over to my imaginary world? Fantastic. I'll be happy to have you. I'll entertain you for a while.
Absolutely. Well, we talk about that a lot. My students and I, you'd say, what people think about other things, or even what they think about you, is really none of your business. So you just kind of embrace who you are and put your best foot forward into that. And I also love that what you mentioned, because I've told people who teach other things, because of course I said I teach literature, I teach composition, I teach mythology, I teach British Lit, and I say I love teaching literature because it's, to me, and I'm very biased, it's the only subject where you are teaching empathy, and you completely nailed it when you talked about that.
Very true.
So let's transition to to steampunk. The steampunk series, Cinder Spires, that you just mentioned a few moments ago. You've got the new one, the highly anticipated one coming out, the Olympian Affair, which is a terrific title. What can you share with us about that? We are a big non-spoiler podcast, but how can you tantalize us for the Olympian Affair?
The Olympian Affair follows up the first book in the series, The Aeronaut's Windlass and the World of the Cinder Spires. The world of the Cinder Spires is this mist-shrouded world where the surface is highly hostile to human life, and it's not really possible to live there. And so everyone, for the most part, resides within these enormous cylinders that were built thousands of years ago, and nobody remembers how they were built. But they were, they're 2 miles across and 2 miles high, and each one has a bunch of levels inside that they call havels, and you live inside essentially these miniature cities that are all one on top of another. And the only way that these spires can stay in contact is by airship, and they have these flying ships and go from spire to spire. And in the last one, we were at the beginning of a war where Spire Aurora is this very aggressive, expanding spire, and they're going up against Spire Albion, which is a kind of a much more relaxed sort of spire, but they don't like being pushed around. And so the whole first thing takes place inside Spire Albion. And in this one, we are sending the crew of the HMS Predator off to, or the AMS Predator off to Spire Olympia, a new spire. And people live very, very differently. You know, I mean, think about in our own human history, you know, when these countries were so separated, in which most people never went more than 40 or 50 miles from where they were born, you know, these societies developed that were so different and so varied and so, you know, just weird compared to each other. And I was imagining this happening in these spires that were even more separated from each other, and how much different would it be? And in this case, this is Spire Olympia is a colony spire from Spire Albion, so they sort of have some common roots, but they're a much more Yankee mercantile sort of spire. And so there's a big trade confabulation, a summit happening that it's being called a trade summit, but what everybody really knows is they're going to pick teams for the war because they know there's a war coming. And the crew of the Predator has been sent to be the adjutants to the diplomatic envoy, and basically they're the dirty tricks crew whose job it is to do whatever needs to be done to make it happen so that things come out the right way. And we've got political dealings, we've got duels, we've got enchanted clothing and poison and kaiju and everything that makes steampunk great.
And it was steampunk an avenue that you wanted to challenge yourself in? Is something you'd always loved? How did that kind of come about?
Well, I had finished Alera, and I was working on, I was deciding what projects to do next. And so I said, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write the first 5 or 6 chapters of several different projects and turn them over and show them to my beta readers, and we'll see what they think. And so I wrote a project that was a science fiction thing that was sort of X-Men meets Men in Black on the moon. And then I wrote kind of a fantasy that was sort of a Black Company based fantasy. I don't know if you've ever read The Black Company by Glenn Cook, but the Black Company is based on his experiences in Vietnam. It's harsh. It is dark fantasy, but also really excellent, really well done. And then I wrote something else. I think it was a sort of an X-Files-y thing. And then the last project that I had was the steampunk project. And I put talking cats in the steampunk project. I probably should have known what was going to happen when the beta readers got a hold of it, but they got a hold of that one and they loved it. And there was a very strong emotional reaction from them. And I went, okay, this is the project I need to do next. This is the one that really seems to be tickling people's imagination. And so I started putting that together.
Fantastic. Well, I can't have you on Coffee with Kenobi and not ask you about Star Wars.
Okay, yeah, let's talk Star Wars.
So, I mean, I'm assuming you're a fan. Talk about how you first kind of discovered Star Wars and your experiences with it.
My sisters took me out. It's the first movie I remember being taken to see. Apparently, I was taken to see Snow White, but I don't remember that. I do remember being taken to Star Wars, and that was on the second night, not premiere night, but and then I remember when Empire came out. My sisters came up, and they're 12 and 14 years older than me, so I kind of had like 3 moms. And my sisters came up, and they lied to my teachers that I had a dentist appointment and got me out of school and blindfolded me and took me to see Empire in the big Orpheus Theater downtown, the old opera house, you know, with the big swooping curtains in front of the movie screen and everything like that. And it was just, it made such an impression on me that when Return of the King came out, I did the same thing with my son. I went up and I lied to his teachers that he had an appointment. We would see the first showing of Return of the King. But yeah, that was where I started. And then after that, it was Star Wars everything. I was like the target audience kid for all the Star Wars toys, you know, and I collected them as quickly as I could. The Star Wars Atari games, you know, I mean, before anything else came, we had any other gaming systems. And, you know, after that, it was, you know, when it came out on video, I was like, I can watch it so many times. You know, I've watched Star Wars over 500 times. I don't know. I mean, you know, that, I mean, not even counting the radio play that was on vinyl record that came out. That was the only thing that was available for the first several years, you know, to be able to hear the sound effects and, you know, the voices and the music, especially. Yeah, Star Wars was formative for me. I mean, that was what, and when you look at it, structurally speaking, it's so well crafted. I mean, it is very well done. There's no fat in A New Hope. You know, I mean, you can't lose anything, and it's still the same story. So I loved it. When I started writing, Star Wars was, of course, a huge influence. It's one of the movies that I put on in the background, you know, when I'm working.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I do think that John Williams does not get even as much credit as he gets for the music in those movies. He doesn't get enough because the music absolutely made those movies. That's what made them so stirring and why they reach so many people.
There's a popular mantra out there that says John Williams is the oxygen of Star Wars. Yeah,
that's not wrong. It's not wrong. He was brilliant.
And I think he carries that into Raiders of the Lost Ark too. I mean, of course, all of stuff, but I think especially with Raiders, he really brings Harrison to life.
Yeah, Raiders, E.T. There's so many things that he's done. Superman. He did the theme song to Superman. On YouTube a few months ago, I saw something go by that said the Superman theme, the epic version, and I went, stop. The Superman theme is the definition of epic. You don't make it more epic by just adding a little bit of wham in the background, you know. I mean, that was already just beyond, beyond anything else epic you could have. I mean, Williams had a genius for being able to pick out the most important emotional elements of each story and to put them into the music somehow. And that's just sorcery, man.
Mm-hmm. His leitmotifs are the stuff of legend. I mean, I actually had the good fortune to see him perform several times. And the first time I saw him, the first song he played was the theme song from Superman. And I have goosebumps now just thinking about it.
Oh, yeah.
Comes to life.
Yeah. He's a treasure of our generation. He really is.
He is. Is Empire, because I'm assuming we're of a similar generation, is Empire your favorite one?
Oh, I'm with the original. With the original Star Wars for me.
I think I am too.
I mean, for Christ's sake, I still call my son Kid like he's Luke, you know? But yeah, Harrison Ford, I think he was great in those movies. I mean, he really hit his peak as Indy, but I do feel bad for him because he's such a good, action hero because his reactions are so amazing that his expressions and his body language in the moment really sells everything that he's doing, and it really makes you like him. But now I've seen him get to do I don't know if you ever saw Shrinking on Apple.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah. And he's brilliant in that. He is his acting is so amazing in that. He's not just doing Harrison Ford like John Wayne did John Wayne. I mean, he's actually turning in the drama. And it's like, I feel a little sorry for him that he got kind of pigeonholed as this leading hero for all those years. I mean, poor guy, on his ranch up in Wyoming or wherever it is. But
yes. Well, I felt like he got kind of it was a little bit short-sighted for him not to get an Emmy nomination because I do think he's not, for a lot of actors, when you see them, Brad Pitt is great, but he's always Brad Pitt, De Niro, whatever. Right. Harrison is able to he's an actor. He's an actual actor.
Yeah, he can do it. And I think he got sold short for a lot of years. On the other hand, though, he did get to be, an American icon. So, I guess. Yeah. I guess it's a glass half full situation for Harrison.
There is that. Yes, there is. Are there, which, I mean, of course, we could talk about Star Wars forever, and I have for over 10 years, but is there a certain character that you find, because I could sort of see Han Solo and some of your characters, but I also see the others. What characters kind of do you sort of, I mean, we love them all for different reasons, but which ones really jump out to you?
I really like the plucky little guy character, and I use the plucky little guy in a lot of my writing. In the Dresden Files, it's Butters. In the Alera books, it's a character named Aaron. But it's the guy who's sort of the humble background, getting important stuff done guy that's based on R2-D2. Because R2-D2, let's face it, he was the hero of Star Wars. I mean, without him, they'd all be dead, and the story'd be over, and that's that.
They'd be smashed in the trash compactor.
Yeah, absolutely. Vader, of course, is the iconic villain of my generation, and he's so good they keep adding him to things. I mean, long after. I believe the actors are gone now. But yet Vader's voice is still there. Vader's, his image is still there. When Rogue One came out, which I thought was a fantastic remake of the Guns of Navarone.
Good point.
Yeah, that's what I think Rogue One was. But that scene, we went from Guns of Navarone to The Exorcist in that scene where Vader's coming down that hallway. That was just like, ooh, that's the Darth Vader I always wanted to see and never got. That's amazing. I also think that a lot of the fan production stuff, I don't know if you've seen the Obi-Wan and Darth Vader lightsaber duel remade by the fans.
I have.
Oh my God, that you could just put that right in the movie, and I wouldn't even complain. I wouldn't even think twice. I would just be like, yeah, that passes. That has become part of canon. That is a sainted scene at this point.
Did you like Vader's appearance in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series?
I only watched the first episode of that. It was just so damn depressing. And
it gets better.
For one reason or another, I never went back to it after that.
Well, you're a pretty busy guy.
Yeah. I think that we'll have to see what happens with Star Wars. I've got watching Ahsoka, I've got a little hope, but at the same time, I'm looking at me and my son are watching it. And that's how I taught him to write, was we sat down and we would watch episodes and I would say, okay, here's what they did right. Here's what they did wrong. Now your turn. What do you think? It's like, well, this could have been better. That could have been better. And we're both sitting there watching Ahsoka going, they really needed, they could have done this much different. And they could have made it hit so much harder. They could have twisted this one little thing and it would have been amazing. And we're just, we hope it develops into something that runs a little bit better. That's the problem when you take something like writing, and writing is something that is very much it's very much a purity of thought thing. It's very intellectual. Mm-hmm. And yet when you take it into the real world, when you're doing a real world production, there are so many different variables that come in, where it's like, well, we don't have enough money to do this, or that actor got sick today, so we can't film this scene with that actor. There's all these things that you have to adjust to on the fly that you don't have when it's just you and the page. And so writing in Hollywood is its own completely unique challenge, and it takes a unique mindset to be able to get it done well.
I'm glad you brought up Ahsoka. We'll get you out of here on this one. I know you've got a lot of things going on. I loved Ahsoka until I wasn't sure. And I feel like the last episode, I would love to have been a fly on the wall for you and your son looking at the last episode. I feel like, to me, a good story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And while you can certainly set up ideas of promise for future stories and storytelling, whether it be books, TV, whatever. You still have to wrap things up. And there's a part of me that doesn't feel like I got things wrapped up. I don't know. What would you say to that?
Ahsoka sort of left you. It sort of left you with. It sort of left you with science fiction blue balls at the end. You didn't feel that sense of release, that something important had happened. You didn't feel that the characters had really developed too much or changed too much. You didn't feel that there was. That there was necessarily a sense of what was going to be happening going forward. It was just like, okay, here's the story, and to a degree, a story is like a song, and the song builds to a crescendo, and then it ends or it fades out or whatever it does. But this just sort of felt like we're just holding one note the whole time, and we get to the end of it, and we're still on that note, and I'm like, I kept waiting for something awesome to happen. I kept waiting for Balin to reveal something incredibly cool, or for something really serious to happen with the Psycho Eyes apprentice Sith girl. For her to have a change, or to at least be captured, and to not understand why she hadn't been killed, or something like that. And I kept waiting for there to be some sort of a greater development of the relationships between the characters who were there, and instead it just sort of seemed like they were just sort of trying to hit their marks, and I didn't feel the heart that I felt in other places, which might just be me, and it might just be might just be the fact that I've got different standards because I'm also one of the wizards, and I wouldn't have done the magic like that. But there's a lot of fans who love it, so maybe I'm not the right one.
Well, and I think it's healthy. Your no makes your yes have more weight. When you were looking at something that you were appreciating. Now, I thought it would have been great if it ended with her going inside the Purrgil and they blast off to go after Ezra. I think that would have been a great way to end season 1. Then you can build and maybe not feel so rushed at the end.
Continuing the chase of the man in black, the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. That would have been fine. I would have been fine with that. Yeah,
that would have been cool.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is
Well, boy, oh boy, it was absolutely terrific to talk to you, my friend. I could easily talk with you forever about Star Wars. You're certainly welcome to come back on anytime. Of course, as we said, the brand new book is coming out. It is called The Olympian Affair. It comes out on November 9th. You've got a massive book tour. What can you share about the tour, and what can you share about what you have coming out in the future?
Well, you can go by and check my website or my socials. You can look for me on Twitter. I'm Longshot Author on Twitter. You can look for Jim Butcher on Google. It'll come up. So there's a schedule for my tour. I'm off to starting on Monday. I'm in San Diego, and the next day Seattle, and the next day Salt Lake, and the next day Chicago, and the next day Kansas City, and then back to Denver. And then Colorado Springs a couple days after that. So if you're in any of those areas, we'll have a nice talk, and we'll have the fans ask a bunch of questions, and I'll make some goofy jokes, and we'll have a good time. All right. Thank you very much, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
A huge thank you to Jim Butcher for joining me on Coffee with Kenobi. Boy, am I excited. And again, huge thanks to Corey, the one and only Corey Club, for introducing me to the world of Jim Butcher and the Dresden Files. That this interview is dedicated to you, my friend. I also want to thank all of you for joining me each and every week on Coffee with Kenobi. The website is coffeewithkenobi.com for Star Wars news, announcements, reviews, videos, and so much more. The official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi is MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. Go to coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel for a no-cost, no-obligation quote. And Disney World, Disneyland, Galaxy's Edge, the Disney Cruise Lines, Mouse Fan Travel can help you make all these things as easy as possible and give you that peace of mind we all appreciate when planning our family vacations. CWK Live is Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time at coffeewithkenobi.com/CWK Live. So please join us as we are rewatching the Mortis trilogy. We are on the second episode, that is Altar of Mortis. So rewatch that or watch it for the first time and join us with your top fives next Tuesday night at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. The CWK Cafe is our Facebook group for Star Wars thoughts, comments, reviews, and opinions in a family-friendly, spoiler and drama-free place. You can find that at coffeewithkenobi.com/community. I also want to thank the CWK Alliance. This show is possible because of the members of the CWK Alliance. Thanks to you, this podcast, CWK Live, event coverage, and so much more comes to life. Find out how you can help this show for as little as $1 a month by joining the CWK Alliance, and you'll receive access to CWK Pour-Over, an exclusive weekly audio and video podcast not heard anywhere else. Last week we did a great show where we looked at 3 horror comics from the 70s and a few, and one that's a little bit more recent, although not that recent. I think it's still from the 80s. And we just kind of give a 10-minute review of each one. It's a blast. Hope you will join us. We like to go through lots of pop culture in addition to Star Wars on CWK Pour-Over. And that is, of course, as I just said, for members of the CWK Alliance. Go to coffeewithkenobi.com/CWK Alliance so you too can be a member of this little group of ours. You can email me, danz at coffeewithkenobi.com. Connect with me on Twitter at Mr. Zer, MRZEHR, on Instagram at danzercwk, and on LinkedIn. Coffee with Kenobi is on social media like Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, and TikTok. You can give the show a like at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi. And subscribe to Coffee with Kenobi's YouTube channel, where you can find access to over 700 videos, past live shows, and events, plus this little podcast right here. Please take a couple minutes to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you want to get some Coffee with Kenobi swag, we have t-shirts, coffee mugs, hoodies, and lots more at coffeewithkenobi.com/shop. If you are interested in starting a podcast or a blog or want to expand your existing brand, or you need a speaker for your school, conference, business, or organization, go to danzmedia.com and get that process started. As always, thank you for joining me twice a week for a virtual cup of coffee. I appreciate your time and look forward to the next opportunity to talk Star Wars with each of you. I'm Dan Zaire, reminding you that this is the podcast you're looking for.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.